So this is a verse, very well-known verse of the Gita, that gives the sum and substance of our business here in this world, and how one should, at the very end, conduct themselves. So this is Attaining the Supreme, 8th chapter, verse 6. You can say together. Yam yam vapi smaram bhavam parishatiyam tekevedaram param paramidatikum teya saratat bhagavi saha. Whatever state of being one remembers when he quits his body. Is there a room that we can, maybe is there a room that the children can kind of be loud in, but we could close the door and then we won't have a competition? Yeah. Whatever state of being one remembers when he quits his body, O son of Kunti, that state he will attain without fail. So Srila Prabhupada's purport is very instructive. The process of changing one's process of changing one's nature at the critical moment of death is herein explained. A person who at the end of his life quits his body thinking of Krishna attains the transcendental nature of the Supreme Lord. But that is not true of a person who thinks of something other than Krishna. This is a point we should note very carefully. How can one die in the proper state of mind? Generally, children aren't so attracted to philosophical discourse. Even adults have to push their brains. So it's better if the children have some other activity where they'll be more peaceful, and then we don't have to have competition. So, how can one die in the proper state of mind? Maharaj Bharat, although a great personality, thought of the deer at the end of his life, and so in his next life he was transferred into the body of a deer. Although as a deer he remembered his past activities, he had to accept that animal body. Of course, one's thought during the course of one's life accumulate to influence one's thought at the moment of death. So this life creates one's next life. So here comes important instruction here. Of course, one's thoughts during the course of one's life accumulate to influence one's thoughts at the moment of death. So this life creates one's next life. If in one's present life one lives in the mode of goodness and always thinks of Krishna, it is possible for one to remember Krishna at the end of one's life. That will help one be transferred to the transcendental nature of Krishna. If one is transcendentally absorbed in Krishna's service, then next body will be transcendental, spiritual, not material. Therefore, chanting Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, is the best process for successfully changing one's state of being at the end of one's life. So, on early Tuesday morning on December 22nd, which was Sakala Ekadashi, I believe it was also the winter solstice, when the winter officially go into the winter season, and it's, I think, the shortest day, something like that, shortest daylight hours, depending on where you are in the world. But on that particularly auspicious time, a very great soul departed. it was also, in addition to Sapala Apadashi, it was the departure day of Devananda Pandit, and I think there was one other person, Jagadish Pandit, I believe. So, great souls, when they depart, just like the departure of Grandfather Bhishma, he was able to depart at a time of his choosing, time of his choice. I want to get this thing in a little bit. So Vishnu was at the time of his departure. He was so self-controlled that even though he was in a situation that to our sense perception was quite horrendous, on a bed of arrows, just suspended like that, but he was in complete and divine consciousness, because by his endeavor and determination to always remember Krishna, Krishna had come to him at his time of death, and he stood there before him. So this is a very exalted personality. But that same opportunity is being offered to all of us on behalf of His Divine Grace, who has given us this transcendental knowledge, so that we too can begin to mold our lives in such a way that we are constantly remembering Krishna. Even if you have to go to the office, or to the school, or to the kitchen, or so many other places. The idea is Kirtanaya Sada Hari. And to prepare for that inevitable time when one will be transferred from this body. So I'm bringing this up specifically because Yamuna Devi Dasi was such a rare soul who actually understood the value of Krishna consciousness and the need to prepare her life for this inevitable moment. Sometimes people think, this talking about death, it's kind of depressing, it's kind of negative. No, we don't want to think about that. When Prahlad was telling his young friends, my dear friends, please chant. Oh, Prahlad, we're only 5 years old. We want to play. But as we get older, it's the same thing. We want to play, in another way. I have to go to the office. I have to mow the lawn. I have to pay, so many things. This is called diversions. So when Yamuna became acquainted with Krishna consciousness in a very profound way, she understood that this lifetime is a lifetime of preparation. For as it explains here, as one is remembering at the time of death, what one is remembering, you will attain that type of body. So we know if you remember Krishna, you'll get a spiritual body. But if we're not practicing, if we're not committed to practicing, at the time of death, we may not remember Krishna. We may be thinking of so many other things. I remember when my grandfather died, his last words, he probably married 60 years by that point, so he tells my grandmother, don't worry, the bills are paid. So, because that's what he was doing. He worked hard. He was an honest man. He worked hard. He maintained his family of 5 and, through the Depression and all that. But it's not what we want to remember at the time of death, because, when you go wherever you're going, these bills here are going to have little to do with your reality. So we're practicing now. We're bodybuilding for this next body. And if we do spiritual exercises we'll get a spiritual body. So Yamuna was a very extraordinary soul, and she took this instruction very seriously. So at the time of her passing, in the Brahma Muhurta hours of December 22nd, Sapala Ekadashi, she left her body in a very divine way, just with her hand in her bead bag and without any disturbance, chanting the holy name, departed. But she had practiced her whole life, and she was immersed always in chanting, whether it was through kirtan or through japa. And nothing made her happier than to engage others in chanting the holy name. Because she was convinced that this was really what we were meant to do. When Lord Chaitanya said we should chant continuously, we were thinking, well, how am I going to do that in my sleep? Or how am I going to do that when I'm eating? Or so many things. But when one becomes deeply involved with the holy name, it's automatically, it's like a reel-to-reel, it's like it's on repeat, and you're going to hear the holy name constantly, even in your sleep. Just like, after the ecstatic Panihati festival and Rath Yatra, where there's 2 days of successive kirtans, and you go to sleep at night, you're hearing those kirtans. So if that just, we have that little experience, just imagine when that becomes a constant experience. So I wanted to speak a little bit about the personality that Yamuna was, and try to introduce you a little bit more to her. Yamuna is a great devotee, exalted devotee that she was, and Yamuna the person, wonderful personality. So she was one of the most influential devotees during the opening years of ISKCON. Srila Prabhupada arrived here. You all seem to know all this, so what year did he arrive?
65.
Right. And, did he have a great welcoming? Was there a big crowd there, garlands and, Nobody. Well, when he finally got to New York, there was one person from the Traveler's Aid with a Greyhound bus ticket who took him to Port Authority. And if you've ever been to Port Authority, New York, oh my God, you don't want to go there. Maybe it's better now, but back then it was a place where all the derelicts and the bums and, this nasty place. But that's where the buses were, so that man took him, put him on the bus to Butler, Pennsylvania. How many of you have been to Butler, Pennsylvania? It's a really depressing place. It's just like, a town that had seen better days, even back then, what to speak of now. So, but that was where his sponsor was, so he went there and he made his endeavor. But he could see that if he was going to do something, it wasn't going to happen in Butler, Pennsylvania, so he went back to New York City, and he was just living here and there. Until finally some young people realized that they liked chanting with the Swami. He was sitting in the park, Tompkins Square Park, under that famous tree that you can still see. And they were coming and meeting him daily in the park, but the weather was changing, it was getting cooler, and then they were thinking, winter's coming, just like, today was kind of a nice day, but you wouldn't maybe want to sit outside as some of the days get a little cooler. So that, especially in New York when the snow comes, so they wanted to continue this chanting, they wanted to continue meeting with the Swami, so they understood they had to have some facility. And so that little storefront was rented. And then a few people came, they started having regular lessons. So one of the people that was coming happened to be the sister of Yamuna and her boyfriend. And they became quite attached and attracted to the Swami. If any of you have read Miracle on 26, Miracle on 2nd Avenue? Really, well, recommended reading. It's really, it's very interesting, it's very enlightening, it's historic, but it's from the perspective of Mukunda Goswami, who was married to Janaki, who was the sister of Yamuna. So, you can get an idea of exactly, what was, some of the little wonderful details of what was going on in that time. So, when it became understood that they were becoming more serious, some of the symptoms of becoming more serious, but you gave up some of your bad habits, like, eating unofferable food, or drinking coffee and tea and maybe even other things, or smoking cigarettes, or in those days it was quite in vogue, quite popular to take things like LSD and other mind-altering substances. And for most people, they were doing it because they were actually looking for the truth. And they weren't finding it in their churches, and they weren't finding it in the philosophy books, and they were thinking, if this is going to alter the mind, maybe I can find something beyond. So Oddly, one time somebody asked Srila Prabhupada, well, Swamiji, have you tried LSD? He goes, no, I haven't, but my students did. My students did, but they've given it up. So, Jan and Mike, they started following these principles. And then Swamiji advised that boys and girls, if they're going to live together, they should get married. So he agreed to marry them. So then Jan, who had become Janaki through the initiation ceremony, wrote to her sister Joan, who was in the West Coast, in Portland, Oregon, and told her that that she was going to get married and she'd like her to come out to the wedding. So I have a little narration about this time here. This was in 1966. So this is taken from transcribed from a little interview with Yamuna. Little did I know what kind of wedding it would be. She didn't, she's in California. We have all the fast connections of communications, and we didn't even have phones so much at those days. We'd actually write on a piece of paper, fold it up, put it in an envelope, stick a stamp on it, and Anyway, so her sister's getting married, she's invited to come, and she's agreed to come. But little did I know what kind of wedding it would be. All I knew was what they had met a Swami, and they received the names, Mukunda and Janaki, from him. When I saw the Swami, he was sitting beside the window in his front room, bathed in sunlight, surrounded by pots of prasadam, which he was distributing to the devotees who were sitting around him. Mukunda introduced me, and Swamiji offered me some prasadam. Because I was a follower of macrobiotics, which is a very strict diet, it's a minimalist diet, like no sugar, no fruits, no eggplant, can't survive it too, no potatoes, so, and mostly brown rice, so we were all kind of like gung-ho on this diet. So now he's offering all this, no dairy. So she goes, I was following it. So this prasadam was very unpalatable to me. Yet this radiant and beautiful person was so eager for me to take it. I did take it. But in my mind I decided that this would be the last time I'd have lunch with these people. Then Swamiji put his hand into a big pot with crystallized sugar syrup sticking to the side. He pulled up a huge, brown, dripping gulab jamun. Take. He made me take it. When I finished the gulab jamun, I was fully convinced this would definitely be the last time I would ever come here. So that was 1966 in September. So then, she was there for 10 days, and following the trip, that visit, then Mukunda, Janaki, and Joan came together back to the West Coast, and they passed through Oregon on their way to San Francisco. The idea was Janaki and Mukunda, they wanted to go to India. So Srila Prabhupada Swamiji suggested, well, maybe before you do that, you could do something to try to introduce other people to this. I hear that in San Francisco, many young people. So he thought, you can read about that in the book, how he kind of thought, yeah, okay, I'll try this, So they were on their way to San Francisco prior to what they thought would be going to India. So they stopped in this little town in it's not in Portland even, it's like in a wilderness area. And in that little town at the base, it's a base town, there's a big huge mountain that was 10,500 feet, very big mountain. And on the top of that mountain, myself and my boyfriend were living. We were employed by the federal government. And there was a big tower on the top, and he would go up every day up to that tower and look out for fires. So they came, and of course very happy to see our good friends. Please come in. Would you like some LSD? No? Because you want to share the Vedic tradition, you want to share the best thing you have with your friends. Would you like some LSD? They didn't want any. Actually, what happened is they got there, we had gone away for the day. Actually, we'd gone away for 2 days. And we had a legal day off, 2 days off. We came back and there was this car there from New York, a little car. So we went into our cabin, and we lived in a one-room cabin. There was no electricity, no running water. Like, there was a little stream outside, so for taking a shower, you just get out, take a pot of water, and we had a wood stove. And anything else, you just went out into the forest. I mean, we were miles. You can't imagine. There was no living entity except animals, like mountain lions and deer and different kinds of birds and things. Otherwise, people didn't very much come up there. So, you didn't really have to worry. You just go out very naturally into the woods and take your bath and do anything. So, there was a car, like, what is this car from New York doing here? And when we went and looked in our little cabin, there were our friends. And so we were really happy to see them. And Janaki was already, she got the fire going, and she was like, had made this dough, some kind of dough, and she was making some little balls and rolling them out, and then throwing them on our stove, and they were like puffing up. And when you haven't seen something like a chapati before, I mean, it's actually pretty mystical, like how a dough ball that's flattened out can puff up. So it's just like kind of watching this thing almost like a trance. And so then we found out, by the way, they had new names. That Jan was now Janaki, Mike was now Mukunda. And they didn't want any drugs. Okay, what's next? Well, they didn't have any meat anymore either. And this whole meal that she was making, there wasn't going to be any dead animals in it. So this was, quite interesting for us, because my boyfriend Sam, at that time point we weren't married, had gone to school with Mike and Joan, now Mukunda. And he was good friends with Joni. He was called Joni then. But they were friends in terms, not boyfriend and girlfriend in the mundane sense, but they had like a spiritual connection. And they were always reading books that in those days we thought were spiritual, like the I Ching or the Tibetan Book of the Dead, or these kind of books that were kind of otherworldly. And they had, gone searching here and there. And they'd come to the conclusion after reading all these books that they couldn't understand them. If you wanted to understand this stuff, you needed a teacher. So at least, even though the books didn't help them too much in their spiritual life, they came to the right conclusion. You need a teacher. So even when I first met Shyam Sundar, he kept telling me, you have to get a teacher. And I was like, typical stupid American woman. I don't want a teacher. I don't want anybody telling me what to do with my life. I want to make my own mistakes. So, there we were, and then they told us, well, we're on the way to San Francisco. We're going to start a temple. So I asked another brilliant question. I said, what's a temple? And Mukunda very seriously answered, just remember, this is like 1966 at this point. It's a storefront painted white. So, maybe you can go inside the room, and then when the kid is quiet, come outside. Can you take the crying baby inside the room? Children always have different types of ecstasies that we don't understand. So, what happened is we were up on that mountain, we had to stay there. They said, you want to come with us? We said, well, we'd love to come, but we have to stay until it snows, because that was our contract. We're up there they figured when it would start to snow, the fire danger would be finished. So we all go to sleep that night, and the next morning I have to respond to the call of nature, so I open the door to go outside, and there was snow on the ground. So not only that, there was mountain lion footprints on the ground too, right in front of our doorway. God was, wake up, it's snow, we can go. So to communicate with the people down below, the forest ranger station, we had this thing you'd crank up, some kind of a CB radio thing, hello, this is the forest rangers. And kind of voices would sound kind of funny, like you were talking with helium or something, but we told them, look, we're going to leave. And they go, no, you can't leave, you have to wait till it snows. We said, well, it snowed. The thing was, we were up so high, it snowed just at the top of the mountain, and they were down below, it hadn't hit down there yet. Said, well, look, our contract says first snow, it snowed, we're leaving. So they agreed, okay, so we packed up everything. Took a couple days, because we had quite a menagerie. We had a couple of horses that I had borrowed, 2 chickens that I borrowed, 2 dogs, and 2 cats we didn't borrow. So the horses went back, the chickens went back, dogs and cats, they all came to San Francisco. So this was in the end of September, 1st of October, that time frame. So we immediately became very intent to find a place to live and to get onto the business of finding a storefront so we could get this Swami to come, because now we were definitely interested to meet this person. One of the other things they had showed us that evening in the cabin was the first original sets of Srimad Bhagavatam that Srila Prabhupada had brought. And the cover is much the same. You see Lord Vishnu lying on this Ananta sage, and then you see all the little, planetaries, the different planets with the different forms of Vishnu. And then you see this lotus flower coming out of the navel with 4-headed Lord Brahma. So, never having seen anything like this before, I asked, what is this? And Mukunda said very seriously, this is God. So then I was actually immediately accepting this idea, because up until that point I had no idea who God was, if He was. I accepted there was a higher power, something bigger than me. That much I was clued in on. And I also accepted I wasn't this body. But beyond that, what was I and what was this bigger power, I had no idea. Now the hippies like to think, I'm God and you're God. Do you feel like God? If somebody said you're God, would you say that? Would you feel like, well, that's how I felt. I'm not God. If I'm God, I mean, the world's not doing too good, but it's going to even be worse if I was to speak of most of the other people I knew. So I really didn't buy into that, I'm God, you're God, we're all God. And then there were the voidists where we could just all merge and become nothing. So those were the prevalent philosophies going around. And to be told, here is God, and have a picture of God, and have a person that looked like a person almost, but not quite, because, the forearms of blue skin, and lying on a snake, floating in the who knows what. It was so much beyond the temporary reality that I was acquainted with that I could accept that here is something beyond my sense perception, and if there is God, then this is definitely God, because He's definitely, not like us. And then when I looked into this beautiful books, I kept seeing this one terminology, Supreme Personality of Godhead. And that made quite an impression because it was just something we hadn't heard like that. We'd say, okay, God, higher power, the great unknown, but Supreme Personality of Godhead. So that made an impression on me. And at that point, I felt, yes, I wanted to meet this teacher. So, in kind of rapid succession, we were all initiated. Myself and Shamsundar and two others were initiated in the first batch in San Francisco in January of '67. And then Yamuna had met a young man named Roger. And they had gone off for a few weeks. And during that time, Yamuna became very convinced that this is what she wanted to give her life to. So they came back, and then they were initiated, and they were given the name Yamuna and Guru Das. So then Srila Prabhupada also married them, initiated them and married them at the same time. And we still weren't totally clued in on a lot of the customs and cultures and practices, so we had learned about making ghee out of butter. But for her wedding, she couldn't afford butter, so she bought margarine. So when they put that on the fire, it was like kind of sputtering and sputtering, causing Prabhupada to comment. He goes, well, he said, this marriage will be like the fire, off to a slow start. But he counseled them that they should keep Krishna in the center and assist each other in their spiritual lives. So then Yamuna was remembering, when he went on his daily morning walk, anyone could go with him. So I was walking one morning, and I asked him, Swamiji, do you think sometime you would allow us to go to Vrindavan with you? And he turned around and he said, yes, I will take you to Vrindavan one day, and I will show you Vrindavan on foot. I thought that was the most wonderful thing I'd ever heard in my life, and I was just waiting for that day to come. So by the time Srila Prabhupada, Swamiji, as we were still calling him, left San Francisco in April, Yamuna had been introduced to traditional Vaishnava cooking, chanting, prasadam distribution, deity worship, because by then Lord Jagannath had arrived and been carved. And this was in April, then a couple months, April up until July. So in July we had first Rath Yatra. But in all of these activities, Yamuna was an exceptionally sincere student, and she took up every one of these activities with a very exemplary devotional attitude, with great care, with great attention, and great love. So in May of that same year, '67, Guru Das and Yamuna received their first letter from Swamiji from New York, and he writes, I have a very good appreciation for both of you, Guru Das and Yamuna. You are two good souls. Now you have combined. Live peacefully, chant Hare Krishna, and be happy in your life. But the next month, what happened, in June, Srila Prabhupada had suffered a stroke. And we didn't know what would the outcome of that would be. So at that point he allowed us to make a prayer to Krishna. It was a very simple prayer. My dear Lord, my spiritual master has not yet completed his work. Please protect him. So in our little storefront temple, we held our first, it wasn't quite a 24-hour kirtan, we had a 12-hour kirtan in front of Lord Jagannath. And it was a most amazing kirtan. Anyone who entered the temple on that particular day was affected by that kirtan, because we were crying from the depths of our heart to Lord Krishna. And he was in front of us in his Lord Jagannath feature. And at that point, we hadn't sewed for him, so he was just standing, as you will sometimes, like if you buy a devi of Lord Jagannath, he's nicely painted and that's it, so that's how he was. But during that particular kirtan, that first long kirtan, it was really seen by practically everybody, even non-devotees, that Lord Jagannath had come alive. And in particular, I remember Janaki was crying. I looked at her. I thought, why are you crying? Maybe she got some news and I haven't heard the news. And I looked at her and she goes, he's there. He's really there. And he was pointing to Lord Jagannath, and other people were just looking. And somehow or other, we felt he was really hearing our prayers and he was reciprocating. And indeed, it must be so, because we got the news then shortly thereafter that he had recovered sufficiently. So then he went back to India to fully recover, and then he came back in September, and he brought little gifts for his students. He brought all the ladies. We got a sari that he brought from Bengal. Remember, mine was white with a embroidered border that was red and blue with a little gold, not jari gold, but yellow gold thread. And Mukunda's book, he has it wrong. He says, I got a blue sari, but it was white with red and green, like. Then don't look at the colors of sari. And then if I ask any guy here, what color of sari is your wife wearing, he would like this. So he says it's blue. Anyways, he gave some cloth also to Yamuna, and he said he gave 2 saris. He goes, this is to make a dress for Lord Jagannath. So we were kind of startled. We thought he was dressed, that paint was his dress, But he drew a little picture, and Yamuna and Harsharani together, they made the first outfit for Lord Jagannath. It was and on the Rath Yatra that year, they debuted. There was a hand-pulled cart. The first Rath Yatra was on the back of a truck, but this was the first hand-pulled cart, and they were wearing their first outfit, beautiful turbans, and Jagannath had peacock feather. So then the next adventure was that it had been decided we'd all go. It was the same crew that had come down to start the San Francisco temple, that we were going to go to London. It was actually Shamsundar had this idea that, if we want to spread Krishna consciousness, we need to get somebody famous to chant, because, whatever the famous person does, then other people, they want to do the same thing, right? So, most famous people at that point in time were the Beatles. So he thought, and they had some spiritual interests, so if we get those Beatles to chant Hare Krishna, the whole world will chant Hare Krishna. That was his rationale. Remember, Srila Prabhupada told Mukunda, and he goes, so what do you think, Mukunda? Because Shamsundar, he tended to be a very, big ideas. So Prabhupada asked Shamsundar, what do you think, Mukunda, what do you think about Shamsundar's idea to meet these Beatles? Like, Prabhupada didn't even know, to meet these Beatles, So Mukunda said, well, it just might work. So then immediately Prabhupada was right behind it, So then Guridas and Yamuna, they also wanted to join. And so in the end, there was 7 of us, 6 adults and a little baby that was 6 weeks old. So following the second Rath Yatra, we took off And it was a little exciting because in those days they were not so anxious to have more hippies in London. So they were, if you were going to come in, you had to show that you were wealthy enough to be a guest in their country. And we had no money. At this point, I will not tell you how we actually, for myself and Shamsundar, how we got the money to go. Krishna made the arrangement, but it was pretty, it fit the times, how we got that money. So we all had tickets, but when you entered, you had to show some ability to, maintain yourself. So Prabhupada loaned us $1,500 from the BBT, just starting BBT. We had flown to Montreal to take darshan. He was there in Montreal waiting to get a permanent visa for America. So it was also, the next day was Janmashtami, and the day after, of course, was Srila Prabhupada's Vyasa Puja Day. So we observed those ceremonies in 1968 with Srila Prabhupada in Montreal before departing. And on the few days we were there, he was giving very detailed instructions on, how we should perform Harinam Sankirtan, because we didn't have books and, any propaganda to give out. So the really only thing we had to offer was really the holy name. So this was very deeply etched in our, in our consciousness. Harinam had been going on in Thank you very much. You're hearing it like freaking out. In San Francisco, the first Western street, in Pumpkin Square Park they did the Harinam, that was out public, but they actually took a chanting party walking through the streets. So all Krishna Vishnu's around, and Yamuna was on that first party, the first day. And so then we gradually developed a taste for going out and chanting in the public. So we knew that that was going to be our key activity in London. And we got over there. We stopped in Amsterdam, and then one by one we came over, taking a ferry boat across. So myself and Shamsundar, we came first, we passed through, we showed the money, and then we wired that same money back. The next couple came through, showed the same money, wired it back, like that, then we all got in. Then we sent it back to Srila Prabhupada and it got lost somewhere. So Shamsundar is like total anxiety, and Srila Prabhupada wrote him a letter, he said, don't worry, Krishna will take care. He says, it's not your fault. He says, it's a bank. It was a 5th class bank. They had made some mistake. Eventually it was recovered. Anyways, we were there with little money. We had to, most of the time, live in different parts of town. Sometimes it just like, we'd go out just like we're here tonight, meeting in somebody's house. 7 nights a week we'd go somewhere, to somebody's house, to a Hindu center, to a some kind of a hippie place, to the arts lab, there was a theater going, the theater, the play, the drama, it was called Hair. And in that movie, it wasn't a movie, it became a movie, but at that point it was on stage, they chanted Hare Krishna as part of the act. So we'd go stand outside that theater. So when the people came out of their theater, we'd be there, the real Hare Krishnas, chanting Hare Krishna. We did anything, anywhere we would just like go. Our little group of 6, and then some people started coming. But we were still living all over the place. So Yamuna mentions, I had to move to a Jamaican ghetto, the top floor of one of the buildings. It was really awful. Day after day after day, I would sit and listen to a tape of Swamiji singing. It was a beautiful tape he had just made in Los Angeles, and I prayed to him, please come, please come. So Swamiji wrote to Yamuna, your appreciation, because she wrote and let him know how much she appreciated this beautiful tape. Your appreciation is so nice. Of course, Srimad Bhagavad Gita and teachings of Lord Chaitanya. is so nice. Srimad Bhagavad Gita and Teachings of Lord Chaitanya. So in the meantime, these books had come out, but we could barely get one copy for all of us with to speak of distribution. So, but he's appreciating her appreciation. So please continue to study and learn and preach in this way to everyone you meet. I'm very happy to learn that you're going to various homes and lecture halls and holding kirtans and delivering lectures from these transcendental literatures. This is very nice. And if you continue in this way, gradually so many people will be attracted that our London Centre will soon be successful. Now, we didn't have a place at that time, but these already said it doesn't matter, it will be successful. So these type of letters really encouraged us. So then after many failed attempts, in the middle of the winter struggle, somehow Shyam Sundar met George Harrison, and he was searching for spirituality, and he had invited us to dinner at his home, and at that dinner we did a very long sustained kirtan. It was very blissful, and then afterwards he said, we should make a record. So that was kind of the beginning. So on the day of the recording, we all went to this, it's a very professional recording studio on Abbey Road. It was very well known. And Yamuna came in and she put tilak on all of the technicians, on all the, of course we had tilak on. So Paul McCartney was there with his wife, Linda. They were operating the control panel. Wow. And George was playing the organ, and Kunda was on the mridanga, and Yamuna was just really deeply praying to Srila Prabhupada for the strength to, properly execute this. It was a bit of a challenge because there was a time frame, and we had to do the perfect kirtan in 2 1/4 minutes. So we spent the whole day just doing take after kirtan, 2 minute and quarter kirtan, one after over and over and over and over. There would be something a little wrong, or finally it was like at the end of the day, it was just it was blissful. I mean, it was kirtan, so it wasn't like this was not blissful. But it was the end of the day. And I remember we just making one more take. And at the end of that take, somehow I picked up this wooden mallet and I hit this. There was a big, huge gong there. I banged that gong, and it made a big noise that you can hear at the end of the kirtan. But at the moment it happened, everybody just looked at me like, what have you done? Because it wasn't rehearsed, I just kind of done it, But fortunately, the next day when George came in, he goes, this is going to be big. Listen, and he plays the track, and at the end there's the gong. So everybody was a little happy. So, but Shyam Sundar and Yamuna, they were singing the lead vocals there. And George was really impressed with Yamuna. And one time he told her, he said, Yamuna, if you want, I can make you famous. I can make you, because, when you're a famous person, you have attention. So if you push somebody forward, that person will get, automatic attention. So she was thinking, well, yeah, I could become famous. I might be able to even do more than I'm doing now, but then I might become more attracted to Maya, or I might get distracted. So she said to George, I want to think about it, and then I'll let you know. So she really thought about it, she really prayed about this, and in the end she said, thank you very much, but no thank you, I'm going to stay with Swami and just... It's not that she would have left if she'd done that, but she could just see that world, because we'd had enough exposure even, to see that it would be very hard to practice Krishna consciousness in that atmosphere. So then eventually we finally were living all together, and that was at John Lennon's place. And that was outside of London in a place called Ascot. And Srila Prabhupada would sometimes sit in his room and just solitary bhajan chanting with his harmonium. And Yamuna would sit outside quietly on the stairs. And one morning he called her. He said, "Come in, come in." And he goes, "What are you doing?" He's asking her. And she goes, "I'm listening, Swamiji. Your singing is so beautiful." So he said, "Do you want to come in and listen?" And of course, she wanted to come in and listen. So she said, "Yes, very much." So he said, "You can play the drum and I'll play harmonium and Purushottam can play kartal." So now not only is she going to be listening, she's like part of it. And for several mornings, Yamuna recorded Srila Prabhupada singing prayer by Srila Narottam Das Thakur, which was Hari Hari Vipale. And Prabhupada explained to her that the meaning was, "Oh Lord Hari, I have wasted my life. Although I have taken a rare human birth, like a miser I have not served Radha and Krishna, and thus I knowingly drank poison." So then Prabhupada asked her, "Yamuna, what is your favorite prayer?" She says, "I like Shastastika prayers." That is very nice. And then she asked, "Swamiji, what is your favorite prayer?" And he said, "This song, Hari Hari Bifale." So anyway, finally able to get a building, buried place was established, and we have a center now in London. But Yamuna remembers that this was a real growth period in London, just as there was a burgeoning of youth interested in spiritual life and breaking out of the mold of the 50s and 60s. This happened in London at the same time. We attracted people mostly through the holy name. Srila Prabhupada's arrival in '69 was the catalyst. We were the seeds being planted, and he was the blossoming creeper of Lord Chaitanya's love. And when he came, everything ignited with the thunder and veracity and speed of a firestorm. And it's true, we've been there for months and months and months, just trying to do something. And, a couple of people, we had a handful of little devotees when he came. But once Prabhupada came, my God, it was like, we went from lukewarm to blazing hot. It was completely ecstatic. So just, from the San Francisco days, Srila Prabhupada had encouraged Yamuna to, she has a propensity, she's an excellent teacher. She was herself an excellent student, she was an excellent teacher. I was talking with her sister, and she was saying that in her young days, she was reminding me how she had studied ballet. And ballet is, you have to be very disciplined. So she understood from a young age that if you want to accomplish something, there has to be discipline, and perseverance. So that kind of, mindset was already there for her that made it, the transition into spiritual life easier and more effective. So Srila Prabhupada, encouraged her. He said, "I'm glad to learn you're training at that point we had 2 boys in London, and she was the main one training them. So he said, "I'm glad to learn you're training the 2 boys in Krishna consciousness. You're a very nice girl, and I have full faith in you, and I wish that you develop this line of service to the society." She would train him, and I would shave him. That was my service. He personally taught Yamuna deity worship, and he was really pleased with her service. He said, regarding our London mutt at Sevenbury Place, it was very successfully opened, and the Seva Puja operations are going on very, very nicely under the care of Srimati Yamuna, Devi Dasi. And based upon her recommendations, Prabhupada accepted new disciples. He said in a letter, "I have received their respective letters, Monique, Evelyn, and Jolie, and the recommendation of initiation from Yamuna, Devi, and I am sending their beads to be chanted upon by separate mail." And then in another letter, he acknowledged Yamuna's preaching. He said, "I'm glad to learn that you have defeated the 4 whips of the Ramakrishna mission by giving quotations from the Bhagavad Gita." And he wrote, "If you carry on your service to Radha and Krishna according to the prescribed rules, your love of Krishna will increase more and more. this you are seeing practically by the grace of Krishna. So we can see, as expressed in Bhagavad Gita, it's an ongoing process. We don't just at the last minute suddenly think we're going to remember Krishna, but we have to begin this process immediately when you come into contact. I had written to Prabhupada one letter during this time, because I was there with a little baby. It was a little difficult. And I was thinking, wow, so I wrote this. I said, Swamiji, when you were a Grihastha, did you find it difficult to practice Krishna consciousness? I was still not so developed in my understanding of maybe what is a proper question. But he answered me, he said, yes, it was difficult. But he explained it was difficult because his family wasn't inclined. So he said, for you should very diligently and sincerely chant 16 rounds about, and he said other regulations, meaning, like little things, not the 4 rules and regulations, but other little regulations may or may not be, perfectly executed, but this 16 rounds. So that was a personal instruction that he gave to me in my inquiry as a Grihastha, how to execute Krishna consciousness, and he emphasized the chanting of the 16 rounds. And that was during a time when I had a small child. We were living from one place to the next, literally. This was before the temple was established. So I could understand from that instruction the importance of the 16 rounds as a preparation, and the beginning and the end. That we chant in the beginning, and that will ensure that we can chant at the end.